The word voluntary, that is in the title, if you will. The word voluntary is that it must be of a voluntary nature of the refugee themselves as an individual. So voluntary repatriation is the voluntary return home to their place of origin inside Myanmar, or the place of their as Myanmar citizens, of the place of their choice. To add to that, I mean, Phil, voluntary, that's the most important principle and the concept. Yeah. Is because, and this is where information to refugees, allowing them to make a well-informed decision is so crucial. Because there are pressures, there are always pressures we all face pressures in our lives, and it's important that refugees make well-informed decisions. And if they're well-informed decisions with the right information, accurate information, not negative propaganda or inaccurate propaganda, then we feel that refugees are able to make their voluntary decision themselves, not others making decisions for them. Well, on repatriation, which is one of what we call a durable solution, there are several solutions to a refugee may find in the future. One would be a voluntary repatriation, we would hope. That would be one solution. Another would be a local integration, remaining in the country of asylum as with the documentation provided to them on a permanent basis, or a third country resettlement to a third country. And in Thailand, there's been a very large-scale resettlement of the Myanmar refugees to date, over 90,000 since 2006. So the guidelines for voluntary repatriation talk, of course, about those principles. The first principle being voluntary, being a voluntary return, a voluntary decision. And that their return would be conducted in safety and with dignity. So the safety, of course, would be the assurances that, on the route home, back home, so that it's a sustainable return, that there's not going to be an ongoing armed conflict in that specific area, let's say, of return. Or they're not going to have to cross minefields to get back to their place of their choosing. So that's the safety element. And then, of course, there's the dignity. The dignity, of course, because people go back, they are citizens of their country. And they should be afforded and accorded all the rights of a normal citizen, in this case as Myanmar citizens. So they should be able to have access to all normal services that one would expect in one's country. We call that, if you will, sometimes a national protection. So that they would be able to afford to documentation, to the services, health and education, and all normal services, and they're not seen as another level of society. They are part of a normal society, and so that dignity is also a very important thing. Well, of course, the Myanmar government, or the country of origin in any conflict situation, when we have a refugee outflux, it is, of course, the country of origin, in this case, Myanmar, has the principal responsibility for the protection of its citizens, and indeed civilians on its territory. Just as I here are under the protection, and you yourself under the protection of the Royal Thai government for our safety and security, they hold a responsibility, the primary responsibility. So the primary responsibility for that voluntary return, in ensuring the conditions of that return, the sustainability of that return, of course, would be the Myanmar government. But they will need support for that, of course. Well-founded principles since since the creation and the mandate and the statute of the Office on International Refugee Law and the Refugee Convention, 1951 conventions. So those principles are enshrined in that international refugee law. The international community, certainly UNHCR, the NGOs, the CBOs, the donor community, have been working with the Royal Thai government for 30 years now. The Royal Thai government has been protecting and assisting refugees for 30 years, and they continue to do that today until their solution can be found. If that solution is a voluntary return, if it's staying within Thailand, if it's resettlement to to a third country. Now, so there's not a new discussion. The discussion on return, relatively new in the last few years, because of the changes taking place inside Myanmar, as we see in 2010, and then a move to a civilian-led government, 2011 with President Thein Sein in power. 2012 we saw temporary ceasefires with principal non-state actors, the conflict with the government, the KNU, the KMPP and others. 12 temporary ceasefires in the last 2 years. Other reforms taking place inside the country, democratic reform, social reform, economic reform, those kind of things. So those are the signs that allows people to talk about possibility for return, including the refugees themselves. In 2012, when I arrived here in 2012, there was a discussion then within the humanitarian community, not between the two governments, but within the humanitarian community about hope for return. That was also a discussion in 2004. There was hope then, of course it didn't take place. But now in the last few years there's been a lot of discussion within the humanitarian community about so-called preparedness for return. And most recently we've seen from meetings between the World Thai Government and the government of Myanmar a discussion about the future return of refugees back home. Not at all. I think we've all been assured and reassured again, assured for many years and reassured very recently by the World Thai Government. Last week, a week ago, the World Thai Government, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, put out a press release assuring that return, again, the principles and the conduct of return in the future, and they stipulated in the future, would be under those international standards and those humanitarian human rights principles. Conditions for return very much depend on a number of factors, such as the first one, the voluntary decision to return. Now, for some refugees as individuals, they may believe the conditions for them are fine for return. So we have seen several thousand people over the last couple of years start to go home. Not very announced, not organized, but they've said for them the conditions are right for return. But for the large majority, they may not feel that the time is right. Now, for UNHCR, when we talk about a return, there can be several types of return. There can be a return that takes place, what we would call spontaneously. The refugees themselves go home. They may not seek assistance from UNHCR or from the humanitarian community, often go unannounced and self-assisted. And then there's a return where people may need support, and where UNHCR and organizations can support that return. For example, for transportation, for documentation, for assistance back home with the various things that support that they may need. That environment, at the moment we feel, may not be there for UNHCR to organize a return, to have a plan and an organized approach to return, because one, we don't see that the refugees themselves are ready for it. Two, there are some, maybe not so much benchmarks, but certain key points. For example, not yet peace. They've had the temporary ceasefire, but there's still a negotiation going on for a permanent ceasefire. Now that could be a major milestone, a permanent ceasefire. And then there's the rebuilding of confidence, because we know there's a lack of confidence in the peace process and uncertain futures. So those conditions would have to be pretty much there for UNHCR certainly to be ready to organize and then promote a return. Return is not necessarily that UNHCR is saying it's time to go. We're saying that if you want to go, because it's still the individual decision, if it's time to go, we'd like to help you. Lots of talk, lots of press and speculation about that. Well, and we had this speculation about secret deals and secret planning for the last couple of years, and we've been very open and transparent about that, UNHCR, that there are no secret deals, there's no secret planning. Certainly UNHCR, we're not sitting down with government poring over documents and dates and routes and things like that. No, we don't have that, because that's not the time. It's not the time for that level of operational planning. And any planning in the context of an organized return, which we're not yet ready to do, would be done, again, very much in consultation with the refugee community itself. And in the last few years, we've developed a consultation, coordination, discussion forum around that preparedness for return, which allows us to, all of us humanitarians, to ensure that the concerns and the participation of refugees in any return plan is fully reflected. What's always next for UNHCR is to try to find to help refugees and try to find a durable solution for them, whatever that solution may be. Some may like to go home and they may need help. That would be a solution. Some may like to, or some may feel that they cannot go home. We have to look at those and see how we can help that, together with the Royal Thai government and maybe other governments. Some are still in process and some still want to and are eligible for resettlement. That program continues. You know, we've had, as I was mentioning, 90,000. The group, large-scale resettlement has come to an end, but individual resettlement continues. So for us, what next is a continuation of this discussion. Certain conditions we cannot put in place. UNHCR cannot put in place a nationwide ceasefire. UNHCR cannot rebuild every school and health post in the areas of origin or return. So there's a lot of actors need to do a lot of work to prepare for those type of conditions to make a return a conducive kind of return, as opposed to a pressurized return. UNHCR's primary concern has and always will be, first and foremost, the individual protection and the individual rights as human beings, the rights of refugees as citizens of Myanmar and at the moment under the protection of the country of asylum, which is Thailand. That would be our principal concern, and our ongoing concern would be that those conditions that created the influx, the flight to Thailand as refugees, that those conditions and those issues are resolved, so that people are able to make decisions about their future.